Welcome to Bethany Community Gardens 2021 Gardening Class Series. Tonight's class is entitled Grow Up. Bethany Community Gardens is about building community through gardening. We are entering our fourth season. Each year, we like to start the year with a gardening class series aimed at new and experienced gardeners who garden in their backyards and at community gardens. No matter where you garden, we believe that gardening not only feeds the body, but builds community and community cohesiveness. Bethany Community Gardens is located at 4702 Southeast Street, which is located at the southwest section of the intersection of I-465 and US 31 on the south side of Indianapolis. In 2020, we had a fantastic year, producing and gave away 2.5 tons of produce to 2 food pantries and our garden volunteers. New volunteers are welcome. We work together every Tuesday evening from late April to mid-October. Tuesday evening anytime between 5 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. Your next opportunity to join us is on the Tuesday after Mother's Day, May 11th. We will be planting warm season crops. This is a great way to gain hands-on gardening experience. All new volunteers are welcome. Just stop in anytime after 5 p.m. and look for the sign-in table. Bethany Community Gardens will continue to follow COVID-19 safety guidelines. We will be wearing masks and cleaning tools between use. For more information, contact Bruce By or Craig Youngman, the co-coordinators of Bethany Community Gardens. We will put their contact information in the chat. Today is our third class. We'll hold one additional class. The next class will be May 4th, entitled Pollinators in the Landscape. Some housekeeping items for tonight's class. Please turn off your camera and mute your microphones. This will enable Jo Ellen's video to take precedence. You'll also want to click on Speaker View in the upper right-hand corner, so you only see just the slides and the speaker. This program will be recorded. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will monitor. Our plan is to stop at intervals and we'll get caught up on the questions. We're very excited to partner with a professional gardening educator. I would like to introduce Ellen Meyers Sharp. She is the Hoosier Gardener. She's a 25-year award-winning veteran of print journalism and owns Right to You, LLC, a freelance writing and editing business. You can find her blog at HoosierGardener.com. Ellen is president of GardenCom, Garden Communicators International. She is an Indiana Advanced Master Gardener. She also co-teaches the City Gardener program with the Purdue Extension Marion County Horticulture Extension Educator. She is a garden coach and has an all-season container planting business. Additionally, for nearly 20 years, she has worked at a large independent garden center in Indianapolis, including a stint as buyer of perennials, trees, and shrubs. I know you're really going to enjoy the program. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Now I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Thank you, Linda. It's hard to think about gardening right now because of how cold it is. I want to share my screen here just 1 second. And, you know, people are out there trying to figure out what to do with their plants that they already had, you know, planted in the garden that they probably shouldn't have had in the garden. And, you know, what they should cover, what they shouldn't cover. So just briefly, it would be good to bring in any, I guess, tender plants that you might have in your pots. I wouldn't worry about the pansies or the violas and stuff like that. But if you jumped the gun and started planting your tropicals or succulents and putting those outside, or any of your house plants, you want to bring those inside. If you've already planted your tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that, you know, you're going to want to cover them or you're going to lose them. There's a, you know, it's always good to think about the best time to put the warm season crops out, like tomato, squash, and all of that. And that's May 10th or Mother's Day. That's sort of the date that we all can sort of safely plant those. And it's not just the ambient temperature. it's also the soil temperature. Because if the plants are planted too soon and the soil's too cold, they'll just sit there and not do anything. You know, you can cover things. You can turn nursery pots upside down and fit them over plants. Like, you know, some people do that for hostas and things like that. But you want to sort of anchor the pot, find a stick and put it through one of the holes of the nursery pot so that it's anchored in the ground. You can use gallon milk jugs, cut the bottom out of it and put that over individual plants. And then, you know, you want to take it off during the day. You can also use any kind of material except plastic to cover large sections of plants. A lot of people this time of the year are concerned about their fruit trees, especially. And so they may want to throw a sheet or something like that over the trees. And again, if there's a way to anchor it in place so that it doesn't blow around, that's the main thing. You can also buy what they call, you know, covers for vegetable gardens. It's just, they're really kind of a lightweight. And it's amazing that underneath those covers, like a windrow cover or something like that, it's just a little bit warmer than it is on the outside, which that little bit of warmth may be just what that plant needs to survive. But, you know, experience teaches us. And so, and also gardening teaches us patience. And so we have to go with the experience of having patience before we're throwing our tomatoes and everything else out there. Most other things would be okay, your lettuces, your spinach and all of that. I probably wouldn't worry too much about that. But today we're going to talk about how to get some height in the garden because maybe you have a small space and you would like to grow some crops up. Or maybe you have an area that you don't really like to see, and so you'd like to have some kind of a fixture that you could grow plants up to sort of hide whatever that image is. And we're gonna, those are kind of the things we're gonna be talking about today. And like Linda said, if you have any questions, throw them in chat and we will get them answered for you. So this is one of my favorite quotes. We were just talking about Frank Lloyd Wright, and a doctor can bury his mistakes, but an architect can only advise his clients to plant vines. And so, you know, that's sort of the gist of this. So one thing to know is that vines can climb or they can trail. And so you need to kind of know if it's a trailing plant or a vining, you know, a climbing plant, because trailing plants are not going to climb on their own. So, you know, how plants climb. Green beans, their stems twine. And I wasn't sure if it was twine, T-W-I-N-E, which is how you spell like twine, which is how you pronounce this word. But I'm thinking it reads like twin. But how you twine, how you can twine, how the green beans twine or climb up a pole. Here, and the vines climb clockwise or counterclockwise. And so, you know, when you're looking at your plant and you're trying to figure out, you know, if you can start guiding it maybe up the bamboo poles or whatever you're wanting it to get going on, look at how it's going around the climbing part of it, the trellis, because that's the way it has to go. You can't like get it going in the opposite direction. So tendrils also climb clockwise or counterclockwise. And these are sort of parts of the plant that are kind of like strings, and they, you know, just kind of grow. You can kind of see how they are getting sort of long, and then they kind of curl at the end. Sometimes these tendrils will be leaves, the petiole of the leaf, like the stem of the leaf, and like in Clematis, that's how they climb. And so again, you want to kind of look at the plant and just, you know, figure out which way it wants to climb. Some plants climb, this is a climbing hydrangea, and you can see like little hairs coming off of the stem there. And, you know, so the other way to climb is like clinging plants can climb. Some of them have almost like mini little suction cups on them to help them. And some of them just have slight little hairs that kind of dig into the groove. And so you also want to make sure what kind of plant it is you're going to have climbing on maybe your brick house, because you wouldn't want it like zoning in on all your mortar or anything like that. So like this one is a Boston fern, and or not a Boston fern, but a Boston ivy. And you can kind of see how it forms just tiny little hairs that help it grow along this stucco. So Clematis, the biggest complaint, one of the biggest complaints I get about Clematis is that it won't climb their 4x4 wood that they have at their mailbox. And that's because the way a Clematis climbs is it's the petiole. So from the stem to where the leaf is, there's a petiole, or that little stretch there that's sort of like a stem. And that only can climb or wind around about 2 inches. And so there's a reason why it won't, why we can't get it to climb, you know, like a 4x4, because it just does not have enough growth in those petioles to actually climb it and to actually wrap around it and climb. So one of the things that we can do if we have a 4x4 stuck in, you know, to hold the mailbox box on, you can put chicken wire around it or some kind of fencing material or hardware cloth, something like that. You kind of wrap it and let the vine grow up that way. Or you can run string or something like that that the plant can climb. But they're not going to be able to climb a 4x4 because, you know, they're just not going to be able to do that. And so what do they climb? So we know that they climb, but what do they climb? They can climb a trellis, which is really just a fixture. It can be any form, any shape. It can be freestanding. It can be nailed, or, you know, nailed against a wall. They can climb an arbor, which, you know, a lot of times they'll grow up the sides of the arbor and then form, you know, a green roof above the arbor to cast shade. And so a lot of times wisteria, or maybe Dutchman's pipe or things like that, or something that would work like on that, as well as some climbing roses. They can climb up a pergola, which is again a covered space, usually freestanding. They can climb around a gazebo. And so, you know, a lot of it is just what do we have in the garden and what would we like for them to climb. They can also climb tutors, which I think these are really cool. And you can paint them lots of different colors. You could change your whole color scheme just by painting your tutors, which is what the garden, the Rotary Garden did up in, I think it's in Illinois, like Rockport, Illinois. And they do that every year. They change the color of the tutors, which really adds a lot. And whether they're metal or wood or whatever, I mean, it just would really sort of make that garden pull together. This one I thought was kind of cool. This was in Australia. I don't get the bathtub exactly, but I thought this was really a cool string dome, and you can kind of see in the middle that there are plants kind of wending their way up, and they could, you know, wend across several strings or wind up one string. Gosh, I'm sorry, you guys. Let's see, I'm going too fast. So Trellising Annuals is really an easy thing to do, and they're really the best things, I think, to get started on. This is a Scarlet runner bean. These are teepees in pots. So we took some bamboo stakes, made a teepee, fastened it at the top, and let the beans climb up that way. Here we have a trellis that is bracing flowers, some native plants. Sometimes they get a little floppy, and so having a trellis in there so that can add some support to that. Black-eyed Susan, climbing black-eyed Susans, they've really started working on these plants, and there's orange appeal and lemon appeal. The names of the vines, which are really cool, and they take sun, and they're a pretty fast grower. It's an annual and very cool. Here we have it growing, and then we have some here in a hanging basket just to kind of show how you can use these vines. Morning glories, again, are a vine that are going to climb. They're not going to, scoot along the ground unless they fall off of the trellis. But my favorite morning glory story is we had like a pole, a power utility pole in the back of where we lived when I was a kid. And my mom really liked morning glories. And so every year she'd plant morning glories and want them, she'd pray, she'd do all this stuff trying to get them to get to the top of the utility pole. And they never quite reached the top of the utility pole. And it's, as a grown up and I've learned more about plants, I find that morning glories get only about maybe 8 or 10 feet tall, which was not quite enough to get way up the utility pole. So, mom was, sort of being a wishful gardener there, wanting the morning glories to cover the pole when they really would have never, at the maturity, they would have never reached that height. Nasturtiums on a fence, nasturtiums are edible. They're really cool to grow with different kinds of herbs and things like that. They have kind of a peppery taste to them, in salads and stuff like that. They're very easy to grow from seed. I grow a few from seed every year. Sweet peas are just a delight to grow on a trellis. You really have to start these. I would, start these. What I do is I start them in peat pots, usually in late February or early March, and let them get going. And then I transplant the peat pots in the gardener, in the trellis area where I want them to grow. You could plant them directly in the outside like that, but I think it helps to get them started just a little bit indoors, because sweet peas, they're going to start looking pretty wimpy once it gets height. So you really want to get that growth going early in the season. And here we have bamboo stakes and scarlet runner beans. This is a Spanish flag, which is an annual vine. You can see it has sort of red and yellow markings on it. It's a good sun vine. This is Hyacinth Bean, which is a beautiful plant. And the seed pods are purple on them. They look like, beans or pea pods, but they're purple. And the stems are really purple. The flowers are that gorgeous pinkish purple. And they're very easy to grow. You just, sow them in the ground along a fenceway or up a trellis or anything like that. Here we have a Cardinal Vine, which even though it says Cardinal Vine, the hummingbirds really like to visit this plant. And it's really a cool little plant because the foliage is very ferny. You can see that on there. And, the tubulars are small, or, they're long, but they're narrow. And so this might be a plant you could look for what they call nectar robbing. And so bees, like bumblebees, are too fat to get down into that trumpet-shaped flower. So what they do is they go to the base of the flower and they puncture a little hole in it and they suck out the nectar that way. And they do it on a lot of plants that have flowers that are shaped like that, like Monarda, some salvias, and also hostas. So just sometime if you're out there and you're seeing bees, fat bees, floating around on the plants, look and watch that. I've actually got video of bees doing that because it's just, how they've adapted from being too fat. This is a glorious vine. It's a gloriosa as it's in its name. This is a South American vine. You can grow this from seed, which you'd want to start early in the season also, but it's a gorgeous vine and it's different and very unusual. This is Trombocino Squash, which is very cool. It is a squash that climbs, and then the squash is sort of narrow and it's got a bend in it. And I babysat a garden a few years ago of a friend of mine who was growing this in his garden. And this plant did not have any powdery mildew on it. The other squash in his area did have some powdery mildew on it, but he told me this plant never gets powdery mildew on it. So if you have, it's like a zucchini, and it's considered an heirloom. And so it might be one to try if you're really pestered by a lot of the mildew and funguses that get on the squash, especially zucchinis. I think gourds are sort of gorgeous plants. This would be like a, the kind of a gourd you could use to make a bird's nest, birdhouse out of it. And, a lot of times they'll grow on a fencing like that maybe is curved over a pathway. And part of it is that sometimes the gourds will have to be in slings. Sometimes you can grow watermelons that way, you can grow cantaloupes that way. And so they're in a sling. A lot of times they'll use pantyhose. Here they're using sort of a netting. And the reason that you do that is because they weigh, a lot, and you don't want them to fall off the vine, and clump somebody in the head, or just fall off the vine and die. Here's another example of how you can grow green beans on an arbor. And so this one, you can actually walk down the arbor. There are all these green beans all along the arbor and going over the arbor. And you can see that, there are a lot of them there, and they would be easy to pick. You can also trellis cucumbers, which you'll probably have to work to get them to climb a little bit. They may not wend themselves around because cucumbers a lot of times are sprawly. And so, just look at the plant and decide how you can anchor it as it's starting to climb. Tomato stakes, these don't climb at all. They are, they're like relaxed. If they're not staked, they're just like flat. And so we really want to stake tomatoes because it's a vining plant. And so we stake them so that the plant grows more upright, produces more food that's not touching the ground, and exposes more of the plant to sun as it grows up. So, we anchor it as it gets taller and taller, but definitely it's a vining plant that we force to grow upright. Here we've got some really cool metal stakes that you can be painted different colors. And there you can see these stakes are like 6 feet. I have some of these, and the indeterminate tomatoes can easily get 6 feet tall. So if you've got some tomato that, it's going to get really tall, these are really cool to do that. I usually put them inside a tube, maybe like a PVC pipe that's maybe about 12 inches tall, that I drill into the ground and get it out and shake the dirt out, put it back in, and then work the stake in the ground to keep it, so that it's not getting too floppy. Here we have, just a frame and then just some string that's attached to the sides of a raised bed. Again, this would allows the plants to grow up it. It doesn't take up a lot of space. You've already got the raised bed there. It looks like it's on a deck or a patio or something like that. So again, it's just a way to get some height in the garden. This is an A-frame trellis. You can make these pretty easily out of just, fencing you can buy. And so this is to allow plants to grow up, get that more exposure to the plant. And again, it's just a nice way to take up not ground space, but, up space. And then there are some perennials that are really good to work with on trellises and climbers. A climbing rose is definitely one of them. This would be another one that you would probably have to wend among the, the parts of the trellis to get it to climb up, take the canes and kind of work them around. And after they're done blooming, you can go out and collect the rose hips, which are just kind of pretty, even in the wintertime. If the rose has a lot of hips, that's really cool. This is a native plant. This is Dutchman's pipevine. The flowers are on the left. It has sort of a heart-shaped leaf. And this is a decent plant for part shade, part sun. It doesn't have to be in blazing hot sun. And it definitely gets dense. The issue with this plant is it's hard to find. And it just is hard to find, but it's probably one of the few native, vines that we have that can handle some shade. And this, on the right is the caterpillar, the pipevine caterpillar. And then on the left is the pipevine butterfly. So, you can kind of get an idea of why this plant might be good to grow if you're into, working with butterflies and caterpillars. Clematis, we talked a little bit about that, or we can also call it clematis, but I learned from a clematis expert that those of us with German heritage say clematis, those that have a British heritage say clematis. And so having German heritage, it's clematis. And so they come in single flowers and double flowers. There is, rules about how you prune them depending on what group the clematis is in. And, it's just, I really like them because some of them bloom all summer. The flowers are big and showy. This one is Clematis Sweet Summer Love, which is sort of a replacement for the Sweet Autumn Clematis, which is an extremely invasive plant, and we don't really want to plant that in our gardens, and we want to make sure that we're, pulling it out, any of the seedlings that we have on there. This is really one of my favorite clematises. This is Raguchi, and it's a bell-shaped clematis, but it also grows up a trellis, or mine grows up kind of a tutor. But the thing about this is it doesn't get clematis wilt, which some of the big flowering clematises get what's called clematis wilt. So they're, it's going into June, the flowers are looking really good, and then about halfway up, the plant dies, it turns brown. And it's just an unfortunate disease that attacks clematis. And you can research online, different ways of combating that, but it's definitely can be an issue with clematis. This is a new one. This is Clematis Stand By Me. It's considered a bush clematis, which a lot of people may not know that there are bush clematises. And this one is about 3 feet tall and 3 feet wide. And you can see some little teepees in there that are kind of bracing the plant. But it's similar to the Raguchi in that it's sort of bell-shaped and then flared. The petals are like flared at the end. And one of the best things about clematis is after they're done is the seed heads. I mean, you can see the beginning of the seed heads there. And here you can see them. I mean, they persist well into winter. They're pretty with frost on it. A lot of the clematis, you don't have to cut back until spring, so you can really enjoy the fact that they have some winter interest in our boring Midwest gardens. This is gold flame honeysuckle. This is not an invasive species. There are like at least 3 native honeysuckles that are very good in the garden. This is gold flame. There's another one called Dropmore Scarlet. There's one called Major Wheeler, and there's one called John Clayton. And those are all native honeysuckles. The John Clayton and Major Wheeler, they're all, selections or hybrids of native honeysuckles, and definitely are worth having. I have the gold flame, and it just smells wonderful. I really like it. And so we don't really want to be planting the Japanese honeysuckle, generally called Hollerania or Halls. This is Trumpet-Vine. It's a native plant. The pollinators like it, hummingbirds like it. This is a thug. And you really need something sturdy, really, really sturdy to grow this plant. It also may not bloom for 5 or 6 years after you plant it. If you drive down the highways, a lot of times you'll see trunks that look about like that, and those are trumpet vines growing along the fence rows of, some of the fencing that we see when we drive along the highways. There are some cultivars of this plant, some that are yellow, some that are red. But it would be one that I would do a lot of research on before I planted it. But it's one that a lot of people use over arbors and things like that because it is quite striking. Who would think that that beautiful flower is a native plant? It's the passion fruit, Passiflora incarnata. You know, sometimes they're commonly called maypops, and you can see the fruit on the right. It actually is such an exquisite flower. But I will tell you that this plant can shed a few seeds and, you know, can like grow maybe not where you want it. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind if you plant it. It's good for like a trellis. It's good along a fence, you know, for dividing the property and things like that. And the fruit is edible. So, but it does self-sow a little bit, and, you know, that can be a problem. Here is the climbing hydrangea again, and I have it actually growing up two trellises side by side that are spaced out about 4 inches from the actual garage. And you know, this is a cool plant because the bark exfoliates, or, you know, kind of flakes off, and it gets kind of cinnamony. You know, the colors are really attractive, I think, even in the wintertime. And so, but it can be an 80-foot plant. So you want to make sure that you've got something that can handle that size. A metal trellises, this has got, I think, a rose growing up it. So they don't have to be wood. They can be really any material that you want that something can climb. I thought this was kind of a cool, it's European, but it's a way to maybe break up, you know, some hardscape that you've got, like the side of a garage or the front of the house would be to, you know, plant trellises. You can set tall plants in front of them like we have there with the little tree and everything. And then there's one where something is actually growing up and it looks kind of like a grape that's growing up the one trellis like that. So again, it's just, you know, how we use them is our imagination. Here we have bamboo stakes all kind of tied together to create some places for peas to climb there. This, I thought, just looked really nice and tidy. And then, you know, just along the fencing there, you can see you've got some roses. And so again, it's not a huge space, but it definitely has a lot going on. And that is the end of that. I love this piece of art, which was in the Purdue Extension Master Gardener demonstration garden, not a demonstration garden. It's, what is it? It's the display garden for All America Selection Plants. And so every year, the Master Gardeners in Purdue Extension plants this area on the state fairgrounds. It's right next to the DNR exhibit, which is sort of a permanent exhibit, but it's on the north side of the fairgrounds. And they plant a lot of All-America selections in there, which are, you know, the best of the best plants. They've been trialed all over the country and they do really well. And so we know that they're going to be good plants here. But somebody created this sculpture there, which I thought was just, you know, kind of a cool thing, and something could climb up that too. But you can go and visit that garden during the fair, but you have to pay to get in on the fairgrounds. But during any other time of the year, I think you can. Jenny, are they doing the garden again?
They will be doing it. Steve Meyer is even planning to.
Okay. Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure since he'd retired what the status of that was, but it's a great place to go. You know, when you pull into the fairgrounds and they want to charge you parking or admission, you tell them you're going to the Master Gardener Gardens, and you won't have to pay unless there's something special going on there, like the fair. But definitely, it's a great place to see new plants and other plants that have been in those gardens for a while, you know, because they're just good plants and they give you lots of ideas on things to try at home.
Are you ready for some questions?
I am.
Okay, so do the hostas need to be covered tonight?
Well, Probably.
Really? Okay.
I
I got a
mean,
lot of work to do then.
I know. I mean, I do not cover anything.
You just take it as
So
it happens.
they're not that far out of the ground. It was worse last year because it was later in the season. It was sort of, I think, like the first week of May, or, you know, maybe just a little bit more into May. And so the hostas were up a lot more. I mean, mine are only just out of the ground. You know, haven't started to unfurl or anything. But the thing about plants a lot of times is that they have more than one set of leaves. So say if your Japanese maple takes a hit, or any of your deciduous plants, your shrubs and stuff like that, they have miraculous another set of leaves that they, if the first batch of leaves get damaged, the second ones will come on. And so, I mean, I just don't cover anything.
On that line, also, we have a question. Do I need to cover the raspberries tonight if they have not flowered yet?
No.
Okay. Another question is, where can I find the smart pots that you talked about last time? She's tried several places.
Okay, if you tried online, because there's a smartpots.com. You can also buy them at Amazon. But I haven't been out to any garden centers yet this year to see if there are any out there. I thought that the forest flower, the one that took over the garden center on West 71st Street, they may have, I think they had them at one point. I know I bought the first one I bought from Altum's, but that's been several years ago. But they're easy to find online. So that might be the most efficient way of getting it, especially if you've called around and no one's got them. You know, and you should
Okay.
tell them they should order them.
Yeah, they should. One more comment was the Trombocino is also resistant to squash borers. Charles made that comment.
Yeah.
And then, do the metal stakes burn the plant?
Metal stakes do not burn the plant.
Okay.
I don't know about the squash borers. There weren't any squash borers in this garden that I watched. But that's a good question. I halfway think they maybe are resistant. But I will try to have an answer to that next week.
Okay. And then, can you save the seeds of the clematis? Can you root a cutting? If so, how?
Well,
Clematis. I said that wrong.
clematis, yeah, it's a woody plant, and usually woody plants are propagated by cuttings, and that would probably be the best way to do that. The only one I've ever seen is, that sows everywhere, is the sweet autumn clematis, that actually has seeds that fly around. So, I mean, if it was me and you were really wanting to experiment, I'd go with the cutting. I'd do a softwood cutting.
Here's a question for you. How is the best way to kill daylilies so I can get nicer plants?
Well, are they the orange ones, like the ones they call ditch lilies? Those are kind of hard to kill, and they're rampant growers. But you can do a couple things. One is you can keep them chopped off. You can dig out the rhizomes. Continually over time, you'll probably get rid of them. Or you can hit them with an herbicide, which I use frugally if I have to, like a Roundup or something like that, that will, kill the plant. But, I'm not trying to advocate that you use a chemical, but, that might be one thing to look at and consider. And you wouldn't wholesale spray it everywhere, you would spot spray it. So, if you've got something really bad that you're trying to control, that might be the way to go. But digging out the daylilies, I keep mine chopped off. I just keep chopping the tops off, and eventually they get starved out, but it takes a long time.
Yep, so those were the orange. So that's the end of the questions. Do we have any other quick questions here? Let's see any others pop in. Let me double check.
If you want to wait 1 second, I will check on the, if you can just, on the squash.
Okay. Well, we'll run through some announcements. So at Bethany Community Gardens, new volunteers are always welcome. We get together every Tuesday evening from late April to mid-October. Tuesday evening, anytime between 5 p.m. and 7:45. Your next opportunity to join us is on Tuesday after Mother's Day, May 11th. We'll be planting the warm season crops, and this is a great way to gain some hands-on experience. Just stop in anytime after 5 p.m. And Bethany Community Gardens is located at 4702 South East Street. That's right where 465 and US 31 come together on the south side. And did you find what you're looking for?
Yeah, they're more tolerant to some of the common summer squash pests, including squash vine borer, squash bugs, and powdery mildew. So it looks like it's something that is resistant, or to that. It's an Italian. The Trombocino is an Italian squash, like zucchini. I mean, it's
okay.
Yeah.
One more last question. Where did you get the colored curly stakes on the tomato plants that you showed?
I think I got those at Gardener's Supply.
And that's an online source?
It is Gardeners. I think it's gardeners.com. You're quiet. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Thank you all for attending. We will edit the video and send it out to all who registered for this class, along with a handout with the resource list and information on how to sign up for the next class, which will be held on May 4th, entitled Pollinators in the Landscape.
And so on the handout that you got tonight is a link to a free newsletter that I do once a month. And also there's a link to greatgardenspeakers.com, which I belong to, and you can write a review if you feel so inclined to write a review there. I would appreciate it, because that's one of the ways that I get talks.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining
everybody.
us. I hope everyone have a good evening and try to stay warm. Thank you.